our Zoom meeting, so we're now recording. So it is April 20th, and I'll just open the floor for questions. Maybe before we do that, I should just kind of reiterate that in lab, we've got the respiratory organs, breathing and respiratory volumes exercises scheduled for this week, which is 45 and 46. So if you go to the lecture course shell, and then of course into that folder, I think entitled Stuff to Copy and Bring to Lab Each Week, right? In there are those different exercises that you've been looking at the last few weeks. And so 45 and 46 are there currently. And as I recall, and I can pull them up if you want to look at them real quick, but I think I downloaded several videos that relate to those exercises. And there's also a voiceover PowerPoint that I put together on exercise 46, and that was respiratory volumes. So you can start getting into that this week. Of course, the quiz is open from noon to 6 today. So everybody, I think, is aware of that, right? Great.
Yep.
Okay. And then I guess I also wanted to talk about, before I forget, the third lecture exam that we talked a little bit about last Wednesday, I think, in terms of what chapters would be covered. That would be 8, 9, 19, and 14. So that would include joints, the muscular system, respiratory, and blood. We start cardiovascular this week according to the schedule, but we're not going to put any of cardiovascular on the exam. All right, so that's just reiterating what we talked about last week, I think. What I wanted to nail down was a date and time, and I just cannot recall. I have so many different notes from different classes here. I'm going to propose that we do this on the 24th to give you as much of the week as possible. But I do remember Sarah saying that she had to work from 11 to 7. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay. Did we talk about a time frame at all?
You just said maybe sometime in the morning.
Okay.
Yeah, that maybe
So-
earlier morning would be better.
Yeah, all right. So I guess what I'm thinking, because that was my recollection, because I wanted to accommodate Sarah, and so I'm thinking maybe we open up the exam like, how does like 8:30 to noon sound? Now there's only 5 of you here as opposed to the 30 that should be here. So I'll just poll you guys. Would that time frame from 8:30 in the morning till noon work?
It does for me.
Sounds good.
Yeah, I'll just have to wake up earlier.
Yeah, that works for me too.
Come on now. Kevin, you get up before noon, I hope.
It depends on how rough the night before was.
Okay. All right. All right.
Sometimes A&P keeps me up and gives me nightmares.
Okay. Well, as it should. Right. Okay. All right. I'm just putting the chat up here just to take a look at what people are writing, because Melissa apparently doesn't have audio or something. And let's see, I want to get the chat. Oh, how do I do this? I want the chat on the right-hand side, and I want you guys at the top of the screen. And how do I do that? All right. Hang on a minute here. Okay, I think I did it. All right, great. All right, so what we'll do then is we will have it open at this point in time from 8:30 in the morning till noon. I'll send an email out after today, after the Zoom meeting. And if there are some conflicts that other people discover, then we might have to alter that a little bit. But this is again why I like to have people here at these Zoom meetings, so I don't have to reply to 5 different people. But the most important people are here, so I appreciate you being here. All right, so look for a confirmation from me in the next couple of days, but we're going to shoot for Friday.
Sounds good.
Okay.
Sounds all right.
All right, so for those who are coming in late, we are going to schedule the 3rd exam, lecture exam, Friday the 24th, open from 8:30 till noon. I haven't heard any conflicts from those in the meeting room today thus far. And I will send an email out today and see if that works. Any questions on that?
What chapters was it again?
8, 9, 19, 14.
Thanks.
Misty just commented in the chat. She works from 7 to 3:30 on Friday.
Okay. All right. Well, I have to think about that, I guess, then. All right, I'll think about that. All right. So let's maybe just see if there are questions related to lab stuff. Any problems with lab stuff?
No?
Just kind of hard to memorize all the muscles. They're just so many.
There are a lot, just like there were a lot of bones. Although we did split that between 2 labs, didn't we?
Yeah.
Um,
There's this. Oh, there's a muscle on your like lower calf. It was called like gastrocnemius or something.
gastrocnemius, yep.
Isn't that gastro a prefix for like things with stomach?
Say that one more time. Isn't that a prefix for
Things to do with stomach?
Oh, yeah. Gastrointestinal. Yeah, that's true. I don't know what the prefix derivation of that specifically refers to. Somebody can Google gastro and see what that prefix refers to. Maybe there is a correlation between the muscle name and the digestive end. I don't know.
It says that the prefix gastro is just relating to the stomach. So
Yeah, so I do not know. Has nothing to do, it's not even close to the stomach, right?
Maybe it's vaguely shaped like it.
Yeah,
Not
I mean,
really.
I just do not know. That's a good question. Maybe.
Would it have something to do with like, oh, I'm probably completely off, but like the flow going through the legs? Like I know, like, I don't know, I'm thinking like when people's legs swell, doesn't that have something to do with the body? Like the
Well,
flow?
that's edema, swelling that can happen on, in your arm as well as your leg. I doubt it, but yeah, I'm just not sure. So back to Joseph's comment about how many muscles there are, and you're right, there are a lot. Keep in mind that when we came up with this list of muscles many years ago, the A&P instructors, same for the bones, is we tried to choose those that were most superficial in some of the major muscle groups related to the head, neck, torso, arm, leg, back, that kind of thing. Now, granted, there are a couple of them in there that might be a little deeper, but 95% of those muscles are pretty superficial on the surface, fairly large, prominent muscles. So could we have abbreviated that list? Of course, we could have abbreviated the list. Could we have enlarged the list? Yes, we could have done that too. It's just a function of, you know, what do typically A&P students, what muscles do they need to learn? And this is a pretty typical list. So, you know, as you go about preparing, you know, for the quiz, which of course is today, or the practical in another 3 weeks, is, you know, maybe list those muscles out on a piece of paper, maybe broken down by area. You have to come up with some schematic, some way of organizing this so that you, when you see the name or hear the name, you immediately at least know where to go in terms of, is this a back muscle? Is this a leg muscle? Is this a neck muscle? You know, so that would be kind of a way to maybe approach this. Try to at least narrow it down to the proper region of the body. That would be a good way to, you know, at least separate it from a lot of the other ones. And then, unfortunately, because we don't have the models to use, we're having to look at the diagrams, and/or I chose some of those YouTube videos that use the same models or very, very similar models that we would have used had we been, you know, together.
I know a good idea of what I did was I was looking at all the different muscles, and I kind of wrote myself a note on the print offs about like what bones they attach to or what bones they're closest to.
Yeah, right. That's a great
That's cool.
idea. That's a very good idea, because when they talk about the origin and the insertion of these muscles, which you guys are not having to know, so believe it or not, it could be a heck of a lot worse. The origin and the insertion ends of muscles, each muscle has one. One is the immovable end and one is the movable end. They often talk about those insertion origins as it relates to what bones those muscles connect to. So Sarah, you're absolutely right. It's a good way to do it. If you were going into kinesiology or say physical therapy as an occupation or occupational therapy, you would have to learn not only these muscles and probably more, especially those that relate, say, to the hand. If you're into the physical therapy end of things and you're specializing in you know, dexterity or how to increase action of hands that were damaged in an accident or something, you know, you'd have to learn not just the muscles, but also their insertion and the origins, which means you got to know the bones that they're attached to. So, yeah. The other thing that I was just thinking of was, if any of you are using any coloring books in A&P, and we talked, I think, about the fact that there's a zillion of them out there on the internet, and they're not terribly expensive. Yeah, there, Sarah's got one. And I know you had maybe brought that with you that one day, or somebody did, to lab early in the semester. This is where the coloring book would really come in handy for the bones, right? And for the muscles. The identification of those structures would be a wonderful way to review by having to color the coloring book, for example, gastrocnemius or whatever. Any other comments related to the lab?
Not currently.
Okay. I would, I guess, just say, let me pull up my lab book here. As you guys start to look at 45 and 46, 45 is just basically a review of the anatomy of the upper and lower respiratory tracts. So you've really studied this to a large extent already in lecture, right? So there shouldn't be a heck of a lot of new stuff here, other than the fact that the videos that I put on Blackboard are, some of them are introducing, for example, the larynx model, which we did not look at in lecture, but we would have looked at in lab. So you will want to go back and just spend some time reviewing the anatomy. You're going to need to know it for the exam anyway. So it's like you're double dipping, if you will. You're studying these structures for lecture and you're learning them for lab and vice versa. So it's really kind of a win-win in that sense. Exercise 46 is breathing and respiratory volumes, and this is where we would have used a little handheld spirometer. And just as you see the student over here blowing into this little handheld device, we would have measured a variety of respiratory volumes. And in this exercise, they talk about several of these, starting there on page, well, it's 386 in my book. I know you guys have a slightly different numbering schematic, but it's the same page that has this lung model. Okay, so if you can find that page, it's
360.
procedure B, explore, and it talks about respiratory capacities and volumes, and they introduce tidal volume, and the video that the PowerPoint voiceover that I put on Blackboard, I go over this with you. Tidal volume, expiratory reserve volume, vital capacity, inspiratory reserve volume, residual volume, which you can't measure with the device, but if you can read about it, you should know what residual volume is. And I, in that voiceover PowerPoint, I talk specifically about this figure 46.5. So you do want to spend some time looking at this and being familiar with some of these different respiratory volumes. This particular spirometer that we would have used can only measure expired air. So you basically breathe through this tube, you blow through this tube, and it causes a little turbine to spin around in the device, and this needle moves, and there's numbers on here. The numbers are either cubic centimeters or milliliters, or volumetric values. And so that's how you measure these different respiratory volumes. And there's directions that they talk about in this exercise, like when to start to breathe, how to expire air through the device. So you have to kind of follow these directions really, really carefully. But you get some pretty decent data. In fact, if you happen to look at that figure and note where it says vital capacity, which is, I'm trying to read this backwards, right here. You guys see the yellow and the blue and the red?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, okay. So if you look at the blue, that's the tidal volume. That's the amount of air that you are inhaling and exhaling during normal quiet breathing. The red is the inspiratory reserve volume, it's called. This is the amount of air that you can inhale into the lungs above and beyond a normal tidal inspiration. And the yellow here is the expiratory reserve. So this is the amount of air you can blow out of your lungs voluntarily at the end of a normal tidal exhalation. So when you add these three up, the inspiratory reserve volume, the tidal volume, and the expiratory reserve volume, that's the vital capacity. So what you would do is you would take the biggest possible breath in that you could into your lungs, and then you would blow all that air out the spirometer until you couldn't push any more out. And then you'd look on the device, on the little dial, and that would be a measurement of your vital capacity. And what we would have done if we had done this in lab is we would have used this table for females, and there's a slightly different table for males. These are your predicted vital capacities that are based not only on sex, but on height and age. So you should, just for the fun of it, refer to that appropriate table, whether you're female or male, and I would have had you look up your vital capacity, circle it, and then we would have compared that to what you would have measured with the spirometer. And the numbers are pretty decent. The students get pretty close values. And when you look at that table, you'll find that as you get older, as you go down the table here, okay, so here's age. As you get older, look what happens to these vital capacities. The numbers go down. So you can't exhale as much air out of your lungs after taking a big, big breath. And why do you think that might be?
More damage to the lungs as you age.
Yeah, I'm not sure if it would be damage so much. I mean, it could be. You're right. It could be if you were a smoker or if you worked in an occupation where you were subjected to environmental pollutants. Absolutely true. But what ends up happening, just as one ages, is the fact that the lungs have less what's called compliance. It's more difficult to expand and stretch the tissues in the lungs, and it's just a function of aging. Your lungs just have less and less elasticity, less compliance, which is not to say, as you mentioned, that we don't sometimes do things in life, i.e. smoking, that could certainly exacerbate that reduction in respiratory capacities too. Certainly that's true.
So it's pretty much like the wear and tear, kind of like how it's mostly older people who have to get the knee surgery because the cartilage is wearing down.
Exactly.
Sort of like that.
Absolutely, Kevin. Same idea. You might remember seeing in our textbook at the very end of each of these chapters, what's the last section? The last section of each chapter called?
Oh.
I'm sorry? You're all reading this, I'm sure. Lifespan changes. Each chapter ends with lifespan changes, which is really interesting. You can look at how age affects skeletal system, respiratory system, endocrine system, all of the systems. And there's some really interesting stuff there.
So why is the height related to it?
It's more a function of the taller you are, generally the bigger thoracic cavity you have.
Oh, okay.
That's all that is, yeah.
Okay.
So somebody who's taller, as you saw on the table, very good observation, has a higher vital capacity. Yeah, just because they have a bigger body frame. That's all that is.
Fair enough.
Yeah. I would also, suggest that you, if you're not doing this, you should be doing this, and that is looking at the lab reports in the back of each exercise. There's some good questions, right? Some matching or some fill-ins. And remember, the answer key to those are posted in Blackboard, so you can check your answers if you want to answer those. Yeah. Okay. So this week is respiratory system. Next week, we turn our attention to blood cells, blood typing, and heart anatomy, which we're actually getting into a little bit of the heart stuff this week because we start cardiovascular system. So if there are no questions related to lab, then maybe we should shift gears and open up the floor for questions related to cardiovascular. If you started that, maybe you haven't even begun that chapter, but this is the week to start that. And I posted yesterday the first of several voiceover PowerPoints in the cardiovascular system. It covers the first 2 sections of that chapter. This is a fairly long chapter, and I won't say it's a hard chapter, but it's a more challenging chapter in some respects. I will say, however, that of all the organ systems that I have taught or have studied, for whatever reason, I always find cardiovascular to be the most interesting for me personally. I just, if I had to pick a chapter that I wanted to research, I'd pick cardiovascular. I just find it super interesting. So that voiceover PowerPoint is in Blackboard. I put it together yesterday. I posted it yesterday. And so we can talk about that, or we can talk about any questions you might have related to blood chapter or respiratory chapter or muscular system. I mean, you tell me how you're doing. What would you like to talk about? What would you like clarification on? What's causing you problems? It can be any chapter. It doesn't have to be cardiovascular.
I was listening to your cardiovascular system PowerPoints, and the most confusing part for me was all that stuff about like the nerves and how they make the heart pulse at certain times, and then all the different waves, what those waves were.
Okay, so that wasn't mine, Joe, that you were watching?
No?
No. No,
Okay.
I think let me,
Yeah, it was someone else, like some different kind of college.
yeah, right. I think it was, I posted some things from Arapahoe Community College, I think it was.
Yep.
Yeah, and so we're going to be getting into those different topics coming up on some future voiceovers that I'll be doing in the next week.
Cool.
Yeah, and that is a confusing part, but it's really super interesting. Once you start, once we start to talk more about that, and I'll be doing that actually in the next voiceover, it'll become a little clearer, or a lot clearer, I hope. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So I guess I would just ask maybe that you hold off until Wednesday, and
Cool.
and hopefully I'll have that done. I'll work on that tomorrow probably, or we're into the cardiovascular system actually, not only today, but we have all of next week as well. So I might not get to it until toward the end of the week.
Okay.
We have the exam on Friday. I'll still plan to meet on Wednesday at 1:15 like we typically do. Okay, so if you want to show up Wednesday, if you have questions, we can certainly talk about that as well. Although I guess what I would suggest is focusing on section 15.1 and 15.2 for if you're getting into cardiovascular. That goes over heart anatomy. Let's try to get the heart anatomy done and really kind of understood. That might be a good goal if you can look at that for Wednesday's meeting. That'd be good. We can go over that as well.
Did you say that you already posted some videos, PowerPoint voiceovers of cardiovascular system though?
There's one that I put together yesterday,
Oh, okay.
and it covers section 15.1, which is literally just one paragraph in the book. It's just super short. General characteristics, and it compares and contrasts what are called the pulmonary and systemic circuits. And I have a slide in there that I talk about that. And a bigger chunk of that voiceover relates to the heart anatomy. Yeah, so that's there. I think it's like maybe 35 minutes long. I took a bit of time and some detail and went over the heart anatomy because it's super important that you understand the anatomy.
Yeah.
And I really, really wish that we could do a dissection because it would mean so much more to you if you could cut into the heart and see the valves and see how thick the left ventricle wall is compared to the right. And we talk about it, but until you really see it, this is a classic example of how, yeah, we can teach these courses online, but I don't think students get as much out of it if they can't, see it in front of themselves, and cut into the heart. I kind of feel bad we can't do that because that's really, really interesting. Students really enjoy that dissection. So how about questions related to blood or respiratory system, muscular system?
On the blood, I know there's only certain blood types that can get like certain transfusions. Can you explain the antigens?
Yeah, the reason that I did not do any voiceover in that chapter, let me just flip to it real quick. That's chapter 14. Is because the blood typing and transfusions, I believe, is like the last section. Yeah, 14.5. And next week in lab, we're scheduled to do blood cells and blood typing. And so I was going to put together another short voiceover related specifically to blood typing.
Okay.
In fact, if you go into the chapter 15 on cardiovascular, I think there's a short video that I posted that somebody else had done, a YouTube video on blood types and blood transfusions, but I'm planning to do one myself as well.
Okay.
That will talk about antigens and antibodies. You've been hearing in the news, haven't you, the last couple of weeks about this potential therapy for COVID-19, whereby they take the antibodies from someone who's recovered from COVID-19 and infuse those antibodies into a patient who is in early or middle stages of the viral infection, with the hope that the antibodies will bind with the antigen, which is the virus, and prevent the virus from causing, problems. That study is being done now. There are people that are receiving the antibody treatments. Again, if you've been watching the news, you've heard this. And if you haven't heard this, you're not watching the news, and you should be watching the news. Yeah, you should be hearing this, because it's very A&P related, right?
Well, with the
Yeah.
news, it's also conflicting because that could work, but I've also been hearing news stories of how people who have successfully recovered tested positive again just after they recovered, apparently. I've been seeing that all over. I'm not sure if it's true or not, but I've been seeing that on the news as well.
Well, when you say you see on the news, what news are you listening or watching?
I can't even remember now. I was just sitting there driving to get gas in my car while the prices were cheaper, and it was on the radio station, the local one.
Oh, okay.
I just heard that. Obviously, they didn't say what news source they got it from, though.
Yeah. As I said, I think the jury is still out as to the effectiveness of antibody treatment. I can tell you, however, that they are providing those antibodies to COVID victims in the hospital. And because at this point, we're trying all sorts of different stuff, right? And just because it might work for one patient doesn't necessarily mean it'll work for another patient sometimes. A really excellent source of news I would recommend for you to watch is on from 6:30 to 7:30 on PBS. It's called the PBS NewsHour, and it's got some very accurate, up-to-date, excellent news. I not to say that the national news, NBC, CBS, CNN, and all those aren't also very good, but I tell you, I just would recommend you take some time and check it out. 6:30, 7:30, Channel 17 for local Buffalo, Toronto market. So anyway, they were talking about that yesterday, in fact, and they were describing how they had an expert. I forget what his title was, but I think he was affiliated with the CDC or the World Health Organization, on one of those organizations, and he was saying how antibody treatment was quite effective for SARS, which was another coronavirus respiratory issue that we had here in the US and around the world about 10 years ago. But for Ebola, which you have all heard of, right? Maybe you affiliate that with Africa. It's a very nasty virus. And you see people who've had Ebola, the folks that are treating them, they're in hazmat suits. I mean, Ebola has a very high infectious dose, actually a very low infectious dose, that being the number of viral particles needed to cause infection. So the more virulent, the more disease causing, the lower the ID value, it's called, infectious dose. And for whatever reason, antibody therapy for Ebola was not terribly effective overall. They tried it because at that point, people were dying all over the place. They wanted to try to help them. So we're still having to discover whether antibody treatment for COVID-19 is going to be effective. And we're just early in the the process of that. Anyway, I got off topic a little bit, but I think pertinent to what's going on in the world today. You'll be hearing more from me about that, but you can also look at the video in YouTube that I posted in chapter 15 folder. So if you're okay, Sarah, I would just hold off on that for now, and we'll talk more about it coming up in next week's lab. If you want to check out what I've got posted, you can do that too.
I had a question about muscles, the muscle system.
Okay.
And skeletal muscle and cardiac muscle, you can kind of like see the striations of myofibrils.
Yeah.
And that's how they contract. But what about smooth muscle? You can't see striations. Does that mean they don't have myofibrils?
They have actin and myosin. So I would say they have myofibrils, but it's a very different architecture. And the book just does not really at all compare and contrast the microanatomy of those cell types at all. So it's a very good observation that you make here. In your textbook, there's a table on page 310 that compares and contrasts skeletal, smooth, and cardiac. And so that's a really nice table to kind of go to. You can see a lot of interesting data and compares and contrasts, of course, the three types. And as you mentioned correctly, skeletal and cardiac have the obvious striations, which you know are due to the light, dark, light, dark, light, dark overlapping or not overlapping of the actin and myosin, right? You all have heard about this. But you see no striations at all in smooth. So it's not that they don't have actin and myosin. I believe they do, but I cannot speak to their specific anatomy. I've not studied that. I'm sure the information is out there if you did some research, but I can't speak to that.
Okay.
Do you remember any other difference between the two, or between the three, I should say? Now, other than the fact that two are involuntary and one is voluntary, right? What's the other anatomic, some other anatomic differences between skeletal, smooth, and cardiac? Do you remember?
Is it smooth muscle acts slower? Or is that not really a thing?
I didn't hear that.
Is it that the smooth muscle moves slower?
Oh, yeah, you're right. From a functional standpoint, there are some differences. Yeah, smooth muscle tends not to fatigue. But I'm getting back to anatomical, I guess, which is related to functional as well, I suppose. Let me give you a hint. Skeletal muscle fibers, multinucleated. What about smooth muscle fibers and cardiac muscle fibers?
They seem to only have one nucleus.
Right, single nucleus. Remember, we also mentioned in one of those PowerPoint slides that in skeletal muscle, we have a well-developed transverse tubule system.
Mm-hmm.
Now remember, the transverse tubule is what relays the muscle impulse into the fiber and causes the sarcoplasmic reticulum to respond by releasing calcium. Remember that? Well, in smooth muscle, there are no transverse tubules. So how do we get the calcium released from the sarcoplasmic reticulum? Well, first of all, the sarcoplasmic reticulum isn't very well developed either in smooth muscle. So oftentimes in the case of smooth muscle contraction, that calcium is coming from the extracellular fluid that then diffuses into the fiber. So there's not a built-in source of calcium storage capability in smooth muscle like there is, let's say, in skeletal or cardiac. So in smooth muscle fibers, they absorb the calcium from the surrounding fluid. It's called extracellular fluid or interstitial fluid. And then, of course, another difference that I think you should be aware of is that instead of having troponin, remember, as we have in skeletal muscle, that's where the calcium binds. And then the tropomyosin moves out of the way to free up those myosin binding sites on the actin. Do you remember us talking about that? In smooth muscle, instead of the troponin, we have a different protein called calmodulin. And that's where the calcium binds, that in turn leads to contraction of the smooth muscle fiber. And there's a couple other differences that are described also. But I cannot speak to the orientation of the actin and the myosin in the smooth muscle fiber. I would have to do some research on that. And I've never really studied it, to be quite honest. Most textbooks focus on skeletal because it's the most common, abundant muscle type in the body, which is not to say cardiac and smooth are not important. Of course they are important, they're critical. But they don't provide, I've never seen textbooks provide much information on smooth or cardiac microanatomy like you do with skeletal muscle. If you took a higher level anatomy and physiology course, say in grad school, I'm sure you would get into those sorts of details. And I can think of a book sitting on my bookshelf at work that I would want to grab if I could, that could answer that question instantly. And I just, yeah, obviously don't have it with me. But that would not be tough to find information on, but not something that you would need to know.
I found it amazing listening to your PowerPoints, like just how fast your muscle reacts to impulses from the brain. It sounds like a slow process, like pipes. I mean, when I'm talking about sarcolemma tubules, like one shouldn't just travel really slowly to make muscles move. Well, yeah, exactly right. And you think about what you're doing right now as you're looking up at the screen, as you're grabbing a pen, as you're moving the page. All of that comes as a result of the brain stimulating the muscles, right? We know that, it's obvious. And it happens so fluidly, so fast, it is tough to comprehend the speed. Now, we talked in lecture about the single muscle twitch. Yep. And we talked about the 3 parts of it: the latent period, the time of contraction, the time of relaxation. Right? Remember that? Yep. And years ago, when I first taught physiology, when I was in grad school, I had a teaching assistantship, so I got paid a little money for teaching labs. And so for several semesters, I taught the physiology lab, one of the sections. We had like, I don't know, 10 sections. And what we used to do for this experiment that looked at the single muscle twitch, and maybe I just told you guys this in a lecture, I forget, is we used to use frogs, the leopard frogs that you can catch around here in the summertime. And this is going to sound a little mean, I guess, but we would dissect out the gastrocnemius muscle of the frog. We would double pith the frog with a probe. And again, not to get disgusting or gross here, but you had to sort of kill the frog first. And so there's a way of doing that humanely. And so we did that first. And then we dissected out the gastrocnemius. Now, we just talked about that at the beginning of class today, right? That's the calf muscle. It's one of the calf muscles, not the only one, but it's the major calf muscle, right, of your body. Same for a frog. So you dissect out this gastrocnemius muscle, you hook it up to a machine, and you stimulate the muscle. And when the muscle contracts, it's connected to another device that would record the movement of the muscle on a piece of paper. Kind of similar to the respiratory volumes that we were talking about earlier, like when you exhale through the spirometer, the pen goes down. When you inhale, the pen goes up, that sort of idea, okay? So when the muscle contracts, the pen on the piece of paper would go up. And when it relaxed, it would go down. So we literally could apply a stimulus, an artificial stimulus from a machine called a stimulator, which is right there on the bench top.
and we would give it, 30 volts of shock, if you will, and the muscle would contract, and then it would relax. So you basically get on that piece of paper this. This is what it would trace, just like this. And so we knew when we delivered the stimulus, because there was another pen that put a little mark on the paper, and then there was this other pen connected to the muscle, and we could measure the distance between when the stimulus was given and when the muscle responded. We could measure this, and we did measure this. And we also measured the period of contraction and the period of relaxation. And so why I'm telling you this whole story is to illustrate the fact that when you look at these components of the signal muscle twitch, this is happening in milliseconds. Well, what is a millisecond?
A thousandth of a second.
Yeah, it's 1/1000th of a second. 1 millisecond is 1/1000th of a second. So these latent periods, as I recall, they were like 15 milliseconds. And the period of contraction might have been 30 milliseconds. And the time of relaxation, which is a little bit longer, would be like, say, 45 or 50, because it takes longer to pump the calcium back into the SR than it did to flood it out in response to the impulse.
Mhm.
So that entire muscle twitch from beginning to end, from latent period to time of relaxation, coming down to the base, the whole thing might have been 120 milliseconds. Okay, think about that. That's a little over 1/10 of a second, because 100 milliseconds is 1/10 of a thousand, right? So point I'm trying to make is, and getting back to Joseph's comment, all this stuff happens in a blink of an eye, literally, or faster. The process of the conduction of the impulse from the brain down to the hand, let's say, and then the transfer of the nerve impulse into a muscle impulse at the neuromuscular junction. And then we got to take that muscle impulse down the sarcolemma into the two tubules. And all this has to happen, and it does, very quickly.
Yeah, that's amazing.
It is amazing. Absolutely is amazing. And so if you get nothing out of this course at the middle of May, if nothing else, an awe and appreciation of the complexity of the human body, that's all I can ask for. And I think you're getting that. It's pretty astounding. And that's just one little piece of one organ system, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, pretty crazy. How about other questions?
I have a question on the respiratory thing. Well, it's more like a clarification.
Mhm.
So the nasal conchi, however you say it, you have 3 sets. Do they all 3 have the same function as each other, or is it different levels?
Yeah, no, they pretty much do the same thing.
Okay.
And so when Sarah talks about the nasal conchi, these, remember, we talked about in the lab where we did the skull,
Mhm.
right? It's reviewed in the respiratory system too, as you said. So when you look at those nasal conchi, they're in the upper respiratory passageways. And if you have your book handy, you can flip to page 733, and I can pull it up here on the computer as well, I guess. But I assume you all have your books. You'll see the right half of the head there in figure 19.2. And there are the superior, middle, and inferior nasal conchi. On the right side, you of course have a left side not shown. So as Sarah said, there's basically 3 pairs of these, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's just kind of showing you one view. If we were to go back to the skeletal system chapter, which is chapter 7, and I'm just looking to see if even any of the skull photographs show it. They usually don't show it very well because these are broken off so easily. They're such fragile bones. They're just super fragile. I guess we'll go to the diagram that's in your lecture text on page 217. It's this pair of diagrams, 217. And you look at that top anterior view of the skull, and you can see two of the three nasal conchae. The superior one is hiding under the nasal bone. That's why you don't see it. There is a superior pair, right?
Mhm.
But it's hidden based on this view. And so remember, we talked about how the superior and middle nasal conchae are really part of what bone?
The ethmoid, right?
Very good. Yes, excellent. And the inferior nasal conchae is its own bone. So superior and middle, part of ethmoid, and inferior nasal conchae, it is its own bone, which is why it's colored light blue and not purple, right? That's why. So anyway, back to what these do. Why are they kind of curved like this? Remember?
Because it heats up the air, moisturizes it, and makes it go faster. Maybe. I know
Yeah.
part of it is.
No, you're right. So from a functional standpoint, it warms the air. You mentioned that.
Mhm.
It moistens the air. You mentioned that. And it moistens the air because these bones are basically lined with mucus, right?
Mhm.
Now, we don't really think about that function this time of year, but if you were outside in the middle of February and it was 3 below zero, 20 below zero, super cold, you don't want to have, first of all, super cold air that's super dry getting into your lungs super quick, because it could damage the bronchial tubes theoretically. So we warm that air up and we moisten it before it gets down into the lungs. And then the third function relates to the fact that it's got this mucus on the surface. So yes, it's moisturizing the air, but what else is it doing to the air too? Remember?
Trapping the particulates.
Right.
Okay.
Trapping the particulates. Because we'd rather trap those particulates there than have them get down into the lungs. Right? Because if it gets trapped up here, what can we do?
Blow them out.
We can
Blow it
sneeze,
out.
we can blow them out, or maybe they
Swallow.
might become part of the mucus that gets into the pharynx and then layer into the pharynx, and then we might swallow
Hmm.
and take it into the stomach, and then the pH2 is going to kill those bacteria, most of them. Right?
So like in the winter when it's so dry and like you would get like a bloody nose, is that why? Is it because your mucus is dried up from?
I'm guessing if I give you an answer. So you think bloody noses are more common in the winter than they might be in the summer?
I think that a lot of people get bloody noses when their houses are so dry.
Well, I agree with you that when I think bloody nose, I think of the bloody noses my kids used to get when they were little. We're not talking just a little blood in your snot. We're talking about full blown, And I don't know about you, but when I was a kid, I had bloody noses much more common at that age for whatever reason than I do now. I never get them now.
Hmm.
But as a kid, they weren't uncommon. Was that the case for most of you guys too, would you say?
Yeah, I would say so.
I don't know the reason for that, but back to your comment about it being drier in the summer. Yeah, it does. It dries out those mucous membranes. And just under those mucous membranes are blood capillaries. So it's not going to take much to potentially maybe cause damage to some of those thin blood vessels. And so, yeah. So back to the shape of those bones, right? We could accomplish warmth and moisturizing and deposition of particulates on a flat surface. Couldn't we do that? Pass air across a flat surface, moisturize it, trap particulates, warm it? Sure. So why are they curved? Now you mentioned
Warm.
it, Sarah. This is a physics thing.
Surface area?
It does increase the surface area, that's true, but there's another reason. The shape.
Was it that it makes the air go faster?
It
No.
makes the air go faster. When it passes across those curved surfaces, the air is accelerated. And that provides for more efficient deposition of particulates. I just think that's really interesting. That's why they're curved. And it's not to say, Joseph, that that doesn't increase surface areas. It certainly does. You're right. But we could increase surface area by other mechanisms too that might be more efficient in that sense. But having them curled speeds the air through it faster. Yeah, so kind of interesting. Okay, how about other questions? Good questions. I like questions.
That was all my questions.
Okay. How about Lauren or Michaela or Melissa or Misty?
I have a question with one of the videos that I watched last week with the blood. There was, and I didn't see it mentioned too much otherwise, talking about new cells entering the blood sinusoid. Do you have like any diagrams or anything like that that would show that?
Okay, I did quite catch the major part of your question. What was it about blood that the video showed?
It was talking about new blood entering the blood sinusoid.
New blood entering the bloodstream?
They said sinusoid.
Again, I didn't catch that.
I'll put it in chat.
Type it on the chat. I must getting hard of hearing or something. I don't know. Oh, sinusoid. Blood sinusoid. I'm not sure what that is. And I just do not remember that part of the video that talked about that. So Melissa, tell me again the gist of the video. The textbook does not, our textbook does not talk about blood sinusoids. So I don't know what that, I don't understand the question. So I'm sorry, I can't address that. I just don't know. It says new blood enters the blood sinusoid. I do not know what a blood sinusoid is. Obviously, it has something to do with in the bone marrow, the stem cells differentiating into. Are we talking red blood cells, white blood cells? I don't know. Don't know. Sorry. Red cells. I gotta search blood sinusoid. I don't know what that is.
I have it. Hold on.
It must be something to do with.
I just posted it in the chat.
Yeah, I've heard of liver sinusoids. Yeah, I don't know. I wouldn't worry about it.
Question regarding the quiz, or not the quiz, exam.
Uh-huh.
Are you going to want us to know that, like, the different blood levels, like amounts of blood, red blood cells that like females have compared to males?
I think you should have a sense of counts, not so much broken down by sex as just overall, you know, how does a platelet count value compare to an RBC? And
Okay.
you know, a person could average, say, the male and the female. So we're talking millions and millions of blood cells compared to a couple 100,000. So I could have just have a sense of the major differences. You know, for example, RBC count for guys, the range is a little bit larger than in females, but we're talking again, you know, somewhere between or somewhere around, we'll just pick a number here. An average for an adult human is probably somewhere, you know, in the neighborhood of 5 million cells per microliter. That's the unit we would use.
Okay.
And you compare that, for example, to white cell count. And sometimes even among the 5 major types of white cells, if you have a blood draw done, they will tell you and give you values for eosinophil count, basophil count, lymphocyte count. Or they break it down. It's called a differential white cell count. But we're talking a significantly less number of cells per microliter, right? Where's my number here? Quite a wide range, 3,500 to 10,500. So we'll just pick something in between, you know, somewhere 7,500 to 8,000 cells, white cells. This is all the white cells types. And then in platelets, was it 150 to 350, something like that? Yeah, 1,000. So you don't have to know specific sex numbers, but I would have an idea if I said what formed element has between 150,000 to 350,000 cells per microliter, you would think immediately platelet and not white cell or erythrocyte.
Okay.
If I asked you what's the most abundant, most common white cell found in the bloodstream, could you answer that? You got a 20% chance of getting it right because there's 5. What's the most common? I would like you all to write that down and then show me on your screen. So don't say anything. Let's take a little quiz here. Don't look it up. Just tell me if you know. Guess if you have to. What is the most abundant type of white cell in your body? Okay, so there's Sarah's. Thank you. Joseph says neutrophils in the chat. Juliana, what did you write down?
I'm not even sure, to be honest.
Did you write a word down?
I have not written one down.
Okay. Neutrophil, Melissa says. You should know your white cells by now. Kevin, I don't see you.
I don't have a camera to my
Oh,
PC.
okay. Well, neutrophil is the answer. Yeah, and so you'll want to have a sense of what is the most abundant, what is the rarest, if you will, or least common type of white cell. So the answer would be neutrophil for the most abundant, Basophil is the least common white cell. In fact, in your book on 543 is a table that lists all the formed elements, and it's just a great summary. You can see some descriptions of these different cells, their counts, and their functions. That's just a super excellent table. Okay, any questions on lecture stuff? Misty, did you want to say something? Your screen lit up. How are your classes coming along?
Mine are coming good.
Yeah, mine are doing all right.
Is anybody really struggling with the remote format? Are your instructors Zooming with you? Are they, how are they interacting with you? Or is everybody doing what I'm doing? I'm just curious.
I'm
My
taking.
life,
Oh, go ahead.
go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
My lifespan's doing the Zoom function, but my composition 2 is not. Composition 2 is mostly just a weekly update on what we should get done in the week, and then submitting the work if it is to be submitted.
And then are you getting that feedback back from your instructor?
Yeah, we get it back, and I'm able to look at it in Blackboard on what notes he put down and what's incorrect and whatnot on it.
Okay. Juliana?
I was taking 2 online courses prior, so those haven't changed at all, but we don't do any like the Zoom or anything. But both the ones that yours and my other class that were on campus are both doing Zooms and posting lectures kind of the same way. So that's
Okay.
been helpful.
Uh-huh, good. All right, for those of you that aren't Zooming with your instructors and not connecting with other students in the class, I personally would find that to be a much more challenging, less engaging way of learning. That's just my opinion. I mean, Zoom isn't the best thing, but I can see at least 2 of you. I'm not sure why everybody else is not sharing their screens. I wish more people would share screens. You feel a little bit more connected physically. I don't know, virtually, I guess is a better way to describe it.
I'm kind of curious as to how this nurses meeting today is going to go, like the orientation, because they have over like 70 students that are going to get on at the same time.
Oh, uh-huh.
Yeah, that'll be interesting.
Yeah.
And
for
how many of you are going to be part of that discussion? Juliana and Sarah?
I think
Uh-huh.
there's a
I
couple
will
more.
be too
I
as
think
well.
Melissa is too. I think.
Oh, okay. Uh-huh. What time is that?
4.
And so is this for all incoming students for next fall, freshmen?
Yeah, it's like the mandatory meeting.
Okay, uh-huh. Well, you can do upwards of, believe it or not, 200 plus people in a Zoom meeting room. We
That's
had a
phenomenal.
faculty meeting on Friday. Now, we didn't have 200, but I think we had probably 50. And I mean, it's not as good as being there, it never will be, but it's like this, I can see you, you can see me, we can chat and talk, and oh, it's not horrible. You can ask questions.
Yeah, it's just weird though because you can't like talking over each other. Like I couldn't see that Kevin was about to talk, so I feel like it's just going to be interesting with that amount of people.
Yeah.
To try to have a conversation.
Well, just know that you can raise your hand virtually,
Yeah.
right? You know how to do that? So hopefully the moderator of the meeting will be on the lookout for people who have questions, and will call on you and that kind of thing. But yeah, I guess you'll have to see how it goes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when we were talking about the blood types and the antibodies earlier, I think last class we talked about whether or not like your blood type matters if you have to have
Yeah.
antibodies. So I talked to my mom last night, and they're supposed to be donating their antibodies, but I guess the blood type plays a lot into it. Like, I guess, I don't know, she found this girl on Facebook or something, but there's like a mom on Facebook that was like saying how sick her daughter is from the coronavirus, and like begging people to donate antibodies.
Mhm.
So my parents are gonna try, but they didn't even know like their blood type, which I guess I don't really know mine either. But
Mhm, mhm.
I guess when they talk to their doctor, it does make a big difference in whether or not you could donate or not. You have to be the same blood type or at least compatible.
Oh, well, yeah, right. I was thinking, I wonder whether somebody, let's say, who is of, we'll just pick a blood type. Let's say you're A positive. If you're sick with corona and you're A positive, and you get the antibodies from somebody who's also A positive, who's gotten better, is that a better outcome than if I had, let's say, had AB and got the antibodies from an AB person? And I don't know if one's own blood type has any influence on the efficiency of the antibody in negating the action of the antigen, which is the virus.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know. They're supposed to be hearing back from the doctor and like I guess somebody in a hospital in Buffalo, whether or not they can donate and like what they have to go through. So I will keep you guys updated and see
Well, that's
what.
great. Yeah, yeah. Obviously that's really wonderful that they're willing to help out. That's,
Yeah.
we all are in it together. And you see news accounts of people who were on death's door, literally, and had treatments like this, and within a day or two made a real turnaround. So if you can know that, the fact that you gave of yourself to save someone, I mean, that you can't, how can you go any higher
Oh, for
calling
sure.
than that, really, That's really
Absolutely.
interesting. Yeah. Okay, well, it's a little after 2:30, so I guess we'll end the meeting unless anybody has any other comments. And we will next meet on Wednesday at 1:15.
I was wondering if we could Zoom by any dumb luck to talk about the extra credit paper, but obviously we don't have to do it right now.
Oh, well, no, we can stay. We'll let everybody else leave, or if anybody else would like to talk about extra credit topics, stay on the line here after we kind of formally end the meeting, and then we can talk. No problem.
Okay.
Otherwise, we'll see you guys on Wednesday, and please try to get into the cardiovascular system and look at that voiceover PowerPoint and come with questions. I'm not hearing many questions, and I'm a little, I don't know where you guys are in these chapters. You need to come with questions. If something's not making sense, write it down and ask.
Okay.
Okay, see you guys Wednesday.
See ya.
No.
Yeah. So we'll just see if Misty and Melissa want to stay on here and listen, or.
I don't know if there's anything that I need to know still that like I don't already know. I figured I'd stay and see what you guys are talking about, and then I can figure it out.
Well, we're just chatting at this point about the extra credit paper, but certainly we can talk about other stuff as well. But that's why Juliana's still here.
Yeah, that's what I mean about the extra credit.
Okay, so you're good?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, I'll see you Wednesday then. Okay, Juliana, question.
So I sent you an email yesterday maybe, but I totally understand if you haven't seen it, about the approval the topic approval.
Gosh, how did I miss that? I'm like checking my email multiple times a day, even
You know
on
what?
weekends.
I sent it like through the Blackboard link, and a couple of I've done
Oh.
it the same way like to a couple of other professors, and they haven't gotten them right away. So I don't know if I'm better off just going like through like the Gmail, I guess, and then sending it that way rather than doing like the email through Blackboard, because
Well,
you're not the only one.
okay. Well, I'll tell you what. Let's just. Do you see my screen here?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I see your email. I don't
Yeah.
know if that's what you're trying. Okay.
Yeah, I'm going to go into my email now and try to determine why I didn't get it, or I mean, unless it came in late. Now here's several of them today.
Okay.
Oh,
I think I'm
there
only
it is.
like kind of seeing your focused, says focused on one side.
You don't see my list of emails?
Yeah, it says like new mail accounts, folders, inbox, and then it says like focused and other, and then it looks like you're creating a
Do you,
email.
do you see my little arrow pen thing moving around?
No.
Well, why the heck?
I wonder if they don't want you to show your emails because it's like personal information or something.
Yeah,
I don't
yeah,
know.
right. Hang on a second here. Let's try this. How about now? Still?
Yeah, I see your cursor now.
Okay, so here you are.
Yeah.
So yeah, so I got it. Now, you sent it this morning?
Maybe it was this morning. I thought I sent it yesterday, but maybe it just came through late because it
Says
must have been this morning. It must have been this morning.
Monday 10:30.
Yeah.
Okay, well that's why I didn't read it.
Oh, fair enough.
I thought you said yesterday.
It's everything just blends in.
Yeah. I fully understand what you're saying. Okay, so
So I was originally thinking the antibody replacement, just because of what my parents are going through. I thought it would be interesting to learn more about, but
yeah, perfect.
I'm like torn between the antibody replacement and like lung cancer. My grandma actually passed away from lung cancer, so I feel like that would be interesting, but I guess I didn't know if you had like any sort of direction, like which one might be better off or be more interesting or be my better option, I guess.
Well, the antibody replacement therapy is fascinating, just given where we are with COVID, right?
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
It's going to require that you learn about what an antibody is and what an antigen is.
Okay.
Which means you'll want to go in and look at that one video that I posted in one of the folders. I forget, it's one of the blood folders.
Okay. Yeah.
It was done by another YouTube person. I can't remember where the source was. And or you check out page 550 through 553 in the textbook, and they talk about blood groups and blood transfusions. So you would need to do some preliminary learning, if you will, before you would probably understand what was being presented in your references.
Okay.
So, and I'm not saying don't do that, because the fact that your folks are going through it, I can see where that's interesting.
Yeah.
Just understand that it's going to be a little more challenging maybe to write it, because you got to do a little bit of research and to understand the topic.
Okay.
That's the only downside to that. I don't even call it a downside, but you can't just like walk in and just start writing. With lung cancer, probably a little bit easier, because we've talked about respiratory system, or you've read about it.
Yeah.
And so on. But
so as far as the antibody, I kind of just like Googled it to see like what kind of, I know like I should be going through Gale or whatever for sources, but I kind of Googled it to like see what direction I could even be headed in. Yeah. And it said something about like immunoglobulin therapy.
Okay.
Would that be the same thing?
Yeah. Immunoglobulin and antibody, same word.
Okay.
They're synonyms. Yeah.
Okay.
And see, that's not something you would know And I'm not even sure if the book even uses the word immunoglobulin.
Yeah, I just like typed in antibody replacement therapy and that's what popped up all the sources. So I was like,
Yeah.
I don't even know if that would be the right direction to be headed.
Yeah, see that's the downside of that topic. And I'll tell you, it does get a little technical sometimes, kind of quickly. Yeah, I mean, they talk about immunoglobulins in your book on 634, and that's really into the lymphatic system, which we haven't gotten into yet. So
Do you think-
I worry just a little bit that you might find yourself drowning in terminology, and you're having to look all this stuff up to understand this, and it could get really frustrating maybe. But you know, I'm not saying you have to get into a super bunch of detail.
but enough
but
for a 6 to 8 page paper.
But you gotta get into some detail. Yeah.
Yeah.
No.
I guess maybe I'll just go with lung cancer just for that, because I
Yeah.
feel like maybe I'll be putting
No,
too much on my plate for the
Yeah,
time being.
yeah, I understand what you're saying. Yeah, that's not a bad choice.
Okay.
Mhm.
And then so like as far as lung cancer goes, like you can just kind of talk about like all the stages, et cetera, et cetera. Like it doesn't have to be like more specified. Does that make
Well,
sense?
Yeah, I'm looking for a paper that's not a high school paper.
Yeah.
So I'm looking for some meat. I'm looking for some detail. I'm looking for some serious A&P, if you will.
Okay. So more like how
You
lung
can take this.
cancer.
You can take this in a million directions. You can.
Okay.
You know, the easiest thing to do is you look for stages, treatment. I mean, you know, a freshman in high school can do that.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not saying that's not important. It is important. And
Yeah.
you can include that, but I'm going to be looking for some synthesis, some digging, some
How it
analysis.
relates back to the class.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Okay. Fair enough.
Okay.
Yeah. I think then I'll plan on going with lung cancer and we'll go from there.
Okay, sounds great. And anything else?
I don't think so.
All right. Well, I will see you Wednesday then.
All right. Sounds good.
Okay. Have
Thank
a great
you.
rest of the day. You bet.
You too.
Bye.
Bye.